Hi, I'm Patrick Avenall. I'm the news editor at APN Educational Media. Today at Protect Ed, a conference that we hosted in Sydney, Catharine Lumby, a professor of media at Macquarie University, spoke about the dangers of sex and relationships pose in the modern social media age. I spoke to Catharine in a one-on-one setting, and it's a really interesting interview, and she raised a lot of interesting points. The audio is a little poor, however. I hope you can forgive it, because it really is an interesting interview. Catharine, you've just spoken about sex and teens and the school environment and social media. I was wondering if you could give us a bit of an overview about, based on what your research, what teenagers are doing in the online space in regard to sex and relationships.
Well, online and social media is now absolutely part of how they form relationships and how they come to understand their own identity and how they come eventually to form intimate relationships. So it's part of sex and gender and personality. And so, you know, that is not some intruder into their world, it is part of their world. They're very comfortable with it, but they have questions about it, and there are things they're still learning to negotiate. They need help from adults with. Yeah.
What sort of questions are they asking?
Well, the main thing is that when it comes to negotiating relationships as they get older, intimate relationships, that they get a lot of information about diseases and plumbing in high schools when it comes to sex, but they don't get much information about how to communicate. There's one young woman said to me, how do I ask for what I want or even know what I want, and how do I know what the other person wants? And that's the kind of discussion that parents and teachers need to be able to have with young people, because otherwise they're just having it with each other and it's like matching socks in the dark.
When I was at school, which was during the 90s, we didn't have the phenomenon of sharing images of ourselves because the technology just wasn't there.
Yeah.
But now the technology is there and we hear a lot about it in the media. Is image sharing of intimate body parts as big a problem as the media plays out? And what can be done to educate kids about the realities of sharing images and what can happen to them?
Well, they do it because it's part of flirting. I mean, it's kind of like in the 1970s, you know, you might have gone off in a corner with a boy and taken your top off. And there was just him there to see it, and no one was taking a photo because the chemist wouldn't have developed it probably. But these days, because you know, cameras are in phones, and you know, you can take a video with your phone and you can distribute it to the internet. You know, young people are sharing intimate images as they're older with each other. The boys do it, the girls do it. Now, I don't think it's a problem per se. The question is, how do we help young people negotiate that ethically? Stop shaming young women for flirting and showing their bodies, because they want to show off their gorgeous young bodies. That's fine. But, you know, the guys should not be then sharing those on. That's number one. And number two, recognising that it is now part of intimate relationships for young people. And not just kind of saying, oh, this has all gone to hell in a handbasket. This is young people experimenting with sexuality and flirting. And it was ever thus.
Without resorting to victim blaming or coming up with a double standard, how can we create practical tips so that kids don't become the victim of revenge porn?
Yes, look, great question. I think we need strong laws about revenge porn, and we actually do need to legally codify the unethical sharing of images. So we do need rules, and we need laws, and we need protocols. But more importantly, we need to engage young people fairly young in working through hypotheticals, working through problem solving around what's involved in image sharing and the boundaries between the public and the private and where they sit. And that's not about standing up and lecturing at them, because, you know, that doesn't work so well. It's about getting them together in small groups, getting the boys and the girls together to hear from each other, to start creating some empathy. And I think we need to break down the double standard you talked about, the shaming and blaming of girls, because a lot of the time it is that double standard where, you know, the boys are set up as the sexual predators and the heroes, and the girls are like, well, they've got to be attractive, but if they're not attractive, or if they act on being attractive, they're a slut. You know, like that awful double standard is still operating, and that's part of the problem. And I think the way to break that down is to start listening to young people and getting them talking to each other in a supportive, educative environment.
When it comes to sex and relationships and personal matters, often the line between what's an an educator or a teacher's responsibility and what's a parent's responsibility can become a little bit blurred. Where do you think an educator's role sort of starts and ends?
Gee, that's a great question. I mean, I think the problem is that social and online media have blurred the boundaries between the private and the public, between the playground and the home. Increasingly, teachers are asked to do more and more and more with less and less and less. And I don't want to see any more responsibility put on them. But my research found that often young people were more prepared to speak to a trusted teacher than to a parent about some of this stuff. So I think that what that tells me is that schools, whether they do it internally or they get external providers in, need to actually be involving and engaging young people in open and honest discussions about what they're doing with social and online media, because it bleeds into the school environment. It's impossible to keep that out of that environment, because what happens online outside bleeds in to the situation inside.
Based on your conversations and your research with high school kids, how confident are you that they're ready to take on the challenges of adulthood and life?
I think they are. I mean, I think they're very sophisticated. There's all this terrible doom and gloom stuff is said about young people, but we know that they're better educated than they ever were. Most of them. I mean, there are some very deprived kids, but generally speaking, they're better educated. They are very sophisticated about how they use online and social media, more sophisticated often than their parents.
Catharine, thanks very much for joining us.
Pleasure.